Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our presentation of The Author Talks, where we bring author events to you in the comfort of your own home. My name is Kate, and tonight I'm privileged to chat with playwright, TV screenwriter, Gold Logie winning actor, and now author, John Wood. Welcome, John.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. We appreciate you spending this evening with us.
I'm very pleased to be doing so.
Excellent. To begin with, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Tonight's presentation has been brought about through a partnership between South Australian Public Libraries, Penguin Random House and Burnside Library. A big thank you to our attendees zooming in on our conversation with John this evening. If you would like me to ask John a question on your behalf, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type in your question. If you can't see that icon, please let your cursor hover over the base of the Zoom screen and it will pop up. Tonight, we are giving away a special prize for one of our attendees zooming in. Penguin Random House will be giving away a copy of John's autobiography. A name will be chosen randomly towards the end of the webinar, and I'll contact that person via email to organise a delivery. So grab your cuppa or glass of wine and sit back and relax.
I've got a glass of wine.
So once again, John, thank you for your time this evening. First of all, congratulations on your book. You must be really pleased with the release of your autobiography, How I Clawed My Way to the Middle.
Yeah, look, I'm delighted that it's happened, and I'm delighted at the response to it so far. I never ever had any inclination to write a memoir, and it was my agent, Kathy Baker, who's a great agent, I have to say, said to me a couple of years ago, "Oh, you should write a memoir." And I thought, nah, not really. And anyway, she said, "Look, write something down about your childhood." So I wrote down what has become a chapter in the book called Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam. And she submitted that to Penguin, and they thought, "Oh, this is nice writing." And they commissioned the book, which is now out and written and done. It's only the publicity that needs to be done now. And I've been full steam ahead with that for the last 10 days or so.
Yeah, and one of our listeners has already written in and asked, this is Gail, have you felt writing your book has been therapeutic? And she must know you because she said it brought back memories of Diana Street, Beaufort Street, Burnt Bridge and our families.
Oh, well, I hope she will give her name. The only Gail I remember from that period was Gail Arnold. Or maybe Gail Grice.
That's it, it's Gail Grice, yeah.
Gail Grice, yes, I know. Yes, I ran into her a few years ago in Adelaide, and when I was over there doing publicity for a company I was fronting, well, you know, I was the face of the company. It was Living Choice Australia, and they were setting up retirement villages, and I ran into Gail then. Yeah, but look, it has... it's brought back many memories, and you know, I approached writing it in much the same way as I approach acting. You know, like working as an actor, and that is trying to live in the moment. You know, and you have to create a character, live in the moment of that character, that specific moment, and you know, and there are, you know, through the evening of a play, there are hundreds of specific moments, and you have to live in them and show how the person is reacting to what's going on around them. And anyway, I found living in the moment here, I suddenly found that I was thrust right back years and years to all those, you know, those times with people like Gail. Gail's father was a carpenter and built a lot of houses in the area, and I remember them vividly. I'm sorry that I don't think they got a mention in the book, but I'm going to have to write another book, Darning the Moth Holes of History, to include everybody that I've left out in this one. But
So was it therapeutic for you?
oh, I think so. It the main thing I was left with, I suppose, was just how much I miss my parents, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And as a young teenager, and I'm sure Gail went through it too back in the day, and you may have even gone through it as well. But and many of the people that are in this webinar will have experienced it. You know, you become a teenager, and your parents become irrelevant. You know, I spent all my teen years at other people's houses. You know, my mother was a terrible cook. She was absolutely dreadful.
And that's Mambo. You call Mum Mambo?
Mambo, yeah. And she, you know, but it wasn't her fault. She was forced to leave school at the age of 11, you know, in about 5th grade, when her mother died of cancer. And she was taken out of school and had to run the house, that, you know, this little house in Stoke Street, Port Melbourne. And she had to cook and do all the housework for her father and 2 brothers. And she'd never had a cooking lesson in her life. And, you know, so she wasn't very good at it. And I, you know, I remember most days waking up to the smell of burnt toast. You know, as burnt toast and overcooked eggs and bacon that she'd made for Dadzo, who was my father, and before he began the long journey to Footscray every day to work in the abattoir.
Right. We'll probably touch on that in a little bit in a moment, but just in those years, you always had the lure of the theatre in your blood, but there was constant pressure to get a job.
Yeah, I've got no idea why. I don't know. Maybe Gail remembers, but there were people that lived next door to us who were Freddie Taylor and his son Johnny Taylor. And they had a factory, you know, right against our front garden that made water tanks. You know, they made galvanized iron water tanks, huge pieces of infrastructure that, you know, they would roll on rollers until they turned into a big half circle, and they'd rivet both halves together and solder them up and put a lid and a base on them. And they would go out to all the various houses and farms around the area, because it was still very much the country in those days, and a lot of places didn't have city water, so they had to collect rainwater off the roofs. And of course, you know, as much of South Australia would be still like that, I guess. But as is much of, you know, we've got big plastic tanks here that we put in a few years ago, and you know, we try not to use city water and try not to waste water as well. But my understanding, you know, I have a memory of, I used to go into the factory because it was always interesting to watch people creating something, and creating a water tank is a pretty spectacular thing. And I used to go in there and watch them. And Johnny was a pretty rough and ready sort of a character. And for some reason, I have this recollection, and I don't know how I was asked or why I was asked, but he performed in a play at Croydon Town Hall. And if Gail remembers anything about it, I'd be very happy to hear it. But I can only imagine that it was The One Day of the Year by Alan Seymour. And, you know, like with what I've learned over the years, I've seen the play a couple of other times, and I believe that was what the play was. And to see this guy who was a tank maker up on stage performing the character of a, you know, I suppose it was in the years just prior to the plays of the angry young men, you know, John, oh God, my short-term memory shot. But you know, there was a period in the 60s when plays started to be written by a group of writers called the Angry Young Men. John Osborne, there, came back, and various other people, and maybe, although I don't know anything about his history, maybe Alan Seymour was one of them, but you know, it was amazing to see a person that you knew as the tank maker that lived next door up on stage as a young man going through all that teenage angst with his parents.
So that motivated you?
Well, I just, the only thing that motivated me really was I got, you know, I needed to get away from my parents because in a sense, they embarrassed me, you know, like as a teenager, I was embarrassed by them, and I'm sure my children and grandchildren are equally embarrassed by me. But, you know, so I used to go around to mates' places and, you know, I'd have dinner with them and stay with them as long as possible before going home to my own bed. And, you know, like, and I imagine life was like that for a lot of young people, you know, a lot of teenagers, male and female in my generation, that just, you know, anything that wasn't home was the ideal, you know, the idyllic situation. And I spent most of my teens somewhere else.
Yeah.
And
you
you know,
also,
like
you also
creating the book, writing the book, I realised what a, you know, what a terrible thing that is for your parents, and how much now I wish I'd spent more time with them.
Well, you did spend some time with your dad. You were a brickies labourer. You also worked in the abattoirs and a clerk for the railways before you actually got onto the stage, or during.
Yeah, it was, but you know, like most people of my generation, we, you know, when we finished school, we went to the CES, the Commonwealth Employment Service, and you know, these supposed experts would help place us in the best place for us, and it was, you know, unforgettable going in and talking to this chap who seemed to understand where I was coming from, and seemed very empathetic with my ideals. And he said, "Well, John, you just seem to have the mind of an artist and the body of a labourer." And he said, and he handed me over a slip of paper, and it was for to go and meet a brickie, a Dutch brickie, and I became a bricklayer's labourer for about 18 months. And
which you hated.
oh, look, it was hard work.
Yeah.
Very hard work. You know, being a bricklayer's labourer, I mean, you're carrying far too many bricks. They're far too heavy for you. So you're probably doing yourself many back injuries, and trying to wheel, you know, and if any brickies labourers out there watching, you know, like, you'll know what I'm talking about, you know, a great big wheelbarrow full of wet mortar, and trying to wheel it up one single plank ramps up onto the next level and then up onto the next. It's just bloody hard work. And, you know, balancing a wheelbarrow when you're 15, it's bloody hard. And I was hopeless at it. I was a hopeless brickies labourer. And, you know, we were taking down a scaffolding at the end of a job, and I pushed this plank out, you know, which was what I was asked to do. And the plank went out so far, and then it bounced up and came back and took my fingernail off. And of course, the brickie didn't have workers' comp, so I couldn't work. And, you know, so that was my introduction to the building industry.
But at the same time, there was always this calling to the stage for you.
Yes, and as I said, I don't know where it came from. The only genuine thing that I can ever remember about acting was Johnny Taylor on stage in the One Day of the Year. But, you know, my mother had been a great fan of the golden years of Hollywood, you know, and she was I'm reminded that she's very much like me, you know, in the old, you know, there's a whole lot of vinyl records behind me, as you can see. Well, during the 60s, I knew who was in what band, and if one drummer went and played for another band, I knew who it was. And Mum knew all the people in those Hollywood movies, and, you know, so she introduced me to a lot of the big players. You know, there were the big stars like Humphrey Bogart and James Stewart, whom she had a crush on, and Clark Gable, and of course all those other people, Leslie Howard, millions of them. But she also had a fascination for the small part players, you know, Alan Jones and, oh God, what was his name? Joey Brown, and all the people that played the mechanicals in the Max Reinhardt production of Midsummer Night's Dream. She knew them all, and there was a guy called Chuckles. Oh.
So it was your mum's interest in the movies that you kind of latched onto that fascination as well.
I guess so. You know, there was a period there where I was trying to get my leaving certificate. I changed from tech school to high school, and I sort of buggered up my whole educational career, because at the end of my first go at leaving, I went from the high school down to Ringwood Tech and chatted to John Ellis, who was a teacher there and something of a mentor to me, and he said, "Oh, I'm a bit worried. My leading man has just dropped out of the end of year play," and I said, "Oh, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm available." The fact was, I should have been sitting for my exams for the leaving, but I didn't tell John that. I told him that everything was over and done with, and
there was something much more interesting to be done.
Well, yeah, you know, and you know, Uncle Stupid goes in and you know, saved the day at Ringwood Tech, but completely buggered up his school career.
But you got into NIDA.
Yeah, that was a couple of years, several years later.
Yep.
Yeah, but I
And
did
then,
get into NIDA, yeah.
And then growing up, I have to ask you about how your long hair brought you much negative attention about your childhood, including at the railways and a misguided newspaper feature in The Truth.
Yes, it was all, yes, well, you know, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones changed the way we thought of our hair in those days. I can't do much with mine at all anymore, but I used to have long hair, and it was, you know, sort of a trademark, I guess, but I'd grown my hair and I just let it keep growing, and it was, by the time I was about 19, it was, you know, it was down to my waist virtually, and you know, it never occurred to me that there was anything wrong with that, and you know, I more than anything, I grew it because I really loved the movie of Tom Jones. And Tom Jones had long hair and he wore ribbons in his hair. And you know, that was Albert Finney, who was a great actor of my generation, you know, different country and a different time and place. But you know, it was only when I started getting spat at in the street by middle-aged women that I thought maybe there is something wrong. And at the time, Leslie was at Monash, and one of her best friends, Susie Peck, or her very best friend, and still a great friend today, Susie Peck, was writing for Go Set. And Go Set was a magazine that was started up by a guy named Tony Schäuble, who'd been at university for donkey's years, you know, and he just kept changing vocations or changing courses. And I think by the time he created Go Set, he was doing zoology. You know, he worked all his way down from the arts to zoology, and within the first month of publication, it was a smash hit, and it made an enormous amount of money, and it eventually morphed into the Australian version of Rolling Stone through Philip Fraser. And I used to pile big bundles of Go Set into my Mini and deliver them to the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, and And Susie or somebody approached us and said, look, we'd really like to write an article for Go Set about guys with long hair. And at the time, the only other person I knew with hair anywhere near my length was Boyd Oxlade, who I understand, I used to give Boyd lifts here and there, and I'd often run into him hitchhiking along the road, and I'd pick him up and take him where he wanted to go. And I believe he wrote Death in Brunswick. I could be wrong, but I think he wrote the actual book of Death in Brunswick, and he and I were sort of in competition for the longest hair around Monash. Not that I was a Monash student; I used to just go there and pick Leslie up. But anyway, for some reason, this was the first time, and I've been dudded by the press many times since. But suddenly, it appeared on the front page of Truth, and Leslie's mother, of course, at that time worked in the local news agency, and she actually opened the bundle of papers and nearly died of a heart attack when she saw me and her daughter on the front page of Truth. But it was all a beat up, you know. I did the interview in the first place because I just wanted to show people there was nothing wrong with me. You know, long hair didn't make me any different, and I was as straight as a die. Like most of my generation, it might sound ludicrous to you, but most of my generation had no idea about homosexuality or, except for the fact that when I declared my interest in wanting to be an actor, all my mates just decided I was a poofter. You know, and I know that's not no longer politically correct, but that's what they referred to me as. You know, it's just a poof. And I don't think I or they had any knowledge of what a poof was. And I don't think any of us had ever met a homosexual. And, unlike today, it's just, it's totally, totally normal.
Yeah.
And,
I'm just going to fast forward a little bit in your career, and just for our South Australian audiences, you've been to South Australia several times on many tours, and it was actually home for you for a little while. Would you like to tell us about that experience?
Of which one?
When you lived in South Australia.
Well, that was that was the first time I came over, and at the time we had a house in the Dandenongs in Ferny Creek, and the children were, I'm not quite sure what age, but Meg was in about 4th grade and Lexi was in maybe 2nd grade. And I was offered, I was initially offered a job. Nick Enright, who became quite a famous writer, was an old friend of mine, and he said, Jim Sharman wants to talk to you. And I'd met Jim back in the late 60s, and I didn't think we got on. I wasn't a great improviser, and Jim had just become really famous because of his productions of Hair and Superstar. And anyway, Nick sent me his phone number, and I rang him, and he asked me if I'd come over to Adelaide to be in a production of Lulu with Judy Davis. And Judy Davis had just had a big hit, of course, with My Brilliant Career. And I thought she was a wonderful actor. And I thought, and at the time I was writing for television. I'd given up acting basically, and I was writing for television. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. And I went over and we did the show, which I presume had fairly mixed reviews. It was Wedekin's play Lulu, which had been adapted by Louis Nowra. And while I was doing the production, Jim sort of dragged me aside one night at the bistro downstairs at the art centre and took me out into the dark and said, look, I'm going to form a company here next year called Lighthouse. And it's going to be 12 actors. Louis will be the playwright in residence, and there'll be myself and Neil Armfield, whom I'd never heard of at the time. And we're going to form an ensemble company that will work together for 12 months. And And I thought, God, that's just too good an opportunity to knock back. So I came over, and Leslie found a place to rent in Heathfield in the hills. And, we pulled the kids out of school over here and went over to South Australia, and Heathfield Primary School was at the bottom of our drive and across the road. And so the kids had a great time there. They really loved South Australia, and they loved living in Heathfield, and they had, it was the first time they'd ever lived with horses, and they'd been mad horse riders and mad keen about the whole business, and they had a wonderful time, and so did I. I mean, it was an idyllic and ideal place to work. South Australian Theatre Company was sensational. I'd never worked anywhere like it, and I don't think any of us had ever worked in quite such an ensemble that, we were in every show playing different characters, and we had a sensational time. I did some of the best work I'd ever done in my life, and I've never equalled some of it, I don't think. And playing Bottom in Jim's production of Midsummer Night's Dream was one of the highlights of my entire life. It was, and I'd already previously been quite enamoured of Shakespeare, but I became totally besotted with him by the time I left South Australia. And,
so after that 2 years in Adelaide, you were sent a script for a television pilot that you really enjoyed, and that was Rafferty's Rules.
Yes,
you were not cast as Rafferty to start off with. Do you want to give us a little bit of background as to how you managed to get the lead role there?
Well, it was like most things, it was a long and arduous process, but in the second year that we were invited to do another year of the ensemble, and in the second year we did not Midsummer, we did Twelfth Night, with Geoffrey Rush and I having an amazing time as Andrew Aguecheek and Sir Toby Belch, just being absolutely totally drunk for the whole performance, pretending. It was only acting, but
I'm glad you clarified that one.
Yeah, well, my wife was surprised, because I didn't realise, but I'd been channeling her father, and and she actually, we used to go out into the auditorium singing, out of the auditorium into the foyer singing, African style songs and reggae style songs, and I was really pleased because after the show that night, to the first night that we opened in Adelaide, Leslie said, "God, I thought it was Fav coming towards you." She actually thought I was her father coming towards her in the foyer, and ricocheting around, being terribly drunk, and we took that production and a production of Patrick White's play Netherwood to Sydney, and all of a sudden people in Sydney remembered who I was. They remembered that I'd ever been an actor, and I started getting all these offers. One was to play Alan Bond in The Challenge, which I did, and another was to play Menzies in a show called The Last Bastion, which was about the fall of Singapore, and had an international cast, which was very flattering to be among, and Timothy West and Warren Mitchell and Robert Vaughan and Michael Blakemore, and I was here I was, this Australian minnow swimming around with all these massive talents, and I was asked, then came the I was sent a script and I was asked if I would like to do Rafferty's Rules, and I read it and I thought it was fantastic. I really would have loved to have done it, but I had to say no. Look, I'm already signed on to do The Last Bastion, and once you take a job, you have to commit to it, and once you've committed, you have to do it. And So I didn't even do an audition for Rafferty's, and then about 18 months later, we'd finished The Last Bastion. Well, it wasn't quite 18 months. It was, I don't know how long it took to make The Last Bastion, but it was made, and I was rung again about Rafferty, and I thought, well, you know, I'd love to, and I auditioned. And as I assume every actor my age, you know, in his late 30s, would have done so as well. Every actor in the country would have loved to play that role, I'm sure. And anyway, I turned out to get it, you know, which was, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I don't know how I managed it, because I still had Menzies' hair. I didn't have the eyebrows. We decided against doing the eyebrows because putting Menzies' eyebrows onto my head just looked ridiculous. And they suited him fine, but they looked just idiotic on me. And but I still had, you know, now it's hard to describe because my hair is all white now, but I had these white patches down the side of my head, and the hair had been cut really short, and it was white, and natural colour on top, and which was sort of a mousy brown, I suppose. And they put a rinse through it that turned the mousy brown sort of slightly darker, and it turned all this orange. So if anybody ever sees the pilot of Rafferty's Rules, you'll see this weird hairstyle. That, you know, but
Yeah,
as I said, lucky, I'm in the right place at the right time.
I don't know about that, John. It seems
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's absolutely true, I think. I could have been totally somewhere else. They'd already made a pilot for Rafferty's Rules with Chris Hayward as Rafferty, and Mark Little as the Fulvio character, or his clerk of courts. And for some reason, and it was directed, you know, by the writer, Ben Lewin, and for some reason they couldn't edit it together. And at the same time, they'd made another show. I can't remember the name of it now, but it starred Nancy Hayes as a court psychiatrist, using the same set, painted in different colours, but using the same set. And I saw that pilot with Nancy, and I thought it was fantastic. You know, she was tough, and it was a really tough piece of writing, and she was great in it, and it was a great pilot, but the Channel 7 people thought it was too robust for commercial television, and it was never made. And apparently they couldn't cut the first attempt at Rafferty's, couldn't edit it into a proper story, and they decided to make it again. And Chris wasn't available. You know, he was in my position from 8 months earlier, and he couldn't do it, and I was available, and I got the job. And it was a wonderful job to do, but it was the right place at the right time, because Chris wasn't available. I could have been somewhere else altogether. But
I just want to touch on really briefly, throughout your memoir, you have this constant struggle between your love of theatre and your cynicism for TV gigs. I quote, "Once again, TV raises its ugly head. We've got a love-hate relationship, hate being too strong, love being too strong." So you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll move on to to Blue Healers, because we've got lots of questions about that one.
Okay, well, for me, there is absolutely no argument about whether I prefer to be on stage or television. I clearly prefer to be on stage. There's something absolutely wonderful about being in a theatre space, and particularly happened for me with a show called Art by Yasmina Razer, and I did it 3 times. But the first time I did it with William McInnes, who was Nick Schultz in Blue Healers, and Kim Gingell, who was an old mate that I'd worked with several times in the past, and Roger Hodgman directed it, and I'd never worked with Roger prior to this. And my first the first thing I had to do was just walk out, you know, everything went dark, and then I walked across the stage and sat down on a chair and just waited, you know, for the lights to come up on me. And when the lights came up, I started to speak. And, you know, I set the scene, you know. My friend Serge has bought a painting, white. It's about this, you know, and disparaging, you know, this white painting. And sitting there on the chair alone on stage with just the audience waiting, I became aware of just how close I was to them. You know, I was on the apron of the stage in front of the curtain, and I was aware of every single thing that was happening in that room, 800-seat theatre, and I was just aware of everything. You know, I was, as I said, working with William, who's a bit of a loose cannon, and I mean, he's wonderful. He's got more talent in his little finger than most of us have got in the rest of our bodies. But I need a bit of time to just relax before I start doing something. And William was saying, hey, what do you, you know, do? William, go on, go. And I could still hear, I was sitting on stage and I could still hear him hissing away in the wings, and I could hear the stage manager on this side cueing the lighting, and, you know, I could hear stage hands moving around behind the set, and I could hear people just sniffling or unwrapping lollies, and I just suddenly thought, you know, I sort of sat there and I just relaxed, and I thought, I'm home. This is my home. And I was so, you know, like, it was like I was having an out-of-body experience, you know, but I really felt like I was totally at home. And then the lights came up and I started the speech. My friend Serge has bought a painting, white, and, you know, it's that wonderful moment where you become aware of the entire audience and the entire surrounds of where you are, and you almost feel like you and the audience are taking the same breath. You know, you're all just breathing in sync, and you're so, you know, it was a wonderful experience. And I realized that I must have, of course, had that feeling in the past without recognizing it, but you know, it's great. And it's sort of like, when something like that works, when you're in a theatre, it's like being a heroin addict, I guess, you know. And I've played a magistrate for 5 years and a sergeant of police for 12, and I've still never seen any real heroin or any real cocaine, you know. Like,
which is great, given you've been in the entertainment industry.
And I've been in the entertainment industry for 50 years and I've never seen any of it. And it's of no interest to me. But
you got that kick from your love.
Well, it's from the work, the drug from the work. And it's, and of course, like a heroin addict, you go seeking it again and hoping that you know, and it can never be the same for a heroin addict. It never apparently is.
But you never got that feeling from your work on the set of a television show?
Oh, sure. You know, no, I did. You know,
okay.
Blue Healers was, well, you know, Rafferty's Rules too. You know, we had a wonderful relationship between the 4 central characters in that show. And we were all theatre actors, and I don't know whether we actually made a cognizant decision, but our performances were all very theatrical. You know, they were very unlike most television performances of the day. You know, we'd finally learned how to pull everything back, you know, and our television shows were very, very professional, and you know, I'm talking about across the whole genre, and we somehow were just slightly larger than than television life. And, you know, we were all very theatrical and quite hammy in a lot of ways. And you know,
Can you just explain that? Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. That you use the word ham quite a lot in your memoir. Can you just give us a definition for ham?
Being overdone, you know.
Okay, overacting.
I remember Frank Thring showing me a picture of himself outside a shop in London when he was starting to make it, and it's just him standing very proudly in front of a shop that sold nothing but ham. And I think, you know, like Frank, you know, a lot of people thought of Frank as pure ham, but he was a much better actor than he's ever been credited with. I think he was a terrific actor in The Right Thing, and if he hit his straps, he was sensational. But
let's talk about Blue Heelers, because we've got lots of people. So you had to audition for the role of Tom. There was some conjecture about audiences not accepting you as a police officer because of your role as Rafferty. So
that's right, you know, and they were both shows were for the Seven Network, of course, and the head of programming at Channel 7, you know, the Network 7, was a guy named Glenn Kingy, who'd had quite a fearsome reputation as a programmer, and his belief was that the audience wouldn't accept me as a police sergeant. They would still think of me as a magistrate. And I thought, well, God, I'm just an actor. You know, like it's either going to work or it's not going to work.
And it was 5 years between the gigs as well.
It was, you know, and I'd done several other things, you know, not to mention working on stage, but I'd done several TV shows in the meantime, and but I just thought, you know, it's either going to work or it's not going to work, and it turned out to work. So, you know, luckily I was right and Glenn was wrong. But, you know, Glenn was very rarely wrong in his assessment of how things would go, and yeah, well, that's what gave him his magic say in what went and what didn't go. But fortunately, we went and we were allowed to go, and it was sensational. But I had to do the audition, and I read the you know, the bio or the small character description of Tom, and his name was Tom Croydon, and I thought, God, this must have been written for me, because I grew up in Croydon, and my father-in-law's name was Tom, my grandfather's name was Tom, and I found out that my father, whom was always referred to as Leslie Thomas Wood, was actually christened Thomas Leslie, but for some reason changed his name to Leslie Thomas. And, you know, so I had all these Toms in my life, and also grew up in Croydon. I thought, this is me, this has to be me. And which of course is absolute nonsense, but you know, it became me, and I became him, and I'm very proud of the fact that I did. You know, like I really enjoyed my career. I mean, I'd enjoyed all my career up until then, but I really enjoyed playing Tom, because he was so straight and honest and tough and courageous, and, you know, all things that I don't think I am. You know, like I would never be able to do what he would do. You know, I remember one day on location at Williamstown, I was walking across the pedestrian crossing. You know, I'd just been to get a cup of coffee or something, you know, or egg and bacon sandwich or something at a local restaurant, and I was walking across the pedestrian crossing dressed in a police uniform, wearing the bat belt with, you know, the holsters and all that stuff, but with, you know, like I was just an actor. And I suddenly thought, my God, what if it gets hostile? I've got nothing to protect myself with, and I'm not brave enough to actually do anything. And it's yeah, but mercifully, even people on the other side of the law had some sort of, you know, in real life, had some sort of respect for Tom. And, you know, I've been approached by thousands of people over the years, you know, for autographs or for whatever. And, you know, some of them have been, you know, like obviously a lot of housewives and kids and stuff like that. But, you know, also a lot of people, you know, big and tats. You think, oh, God, they're going to hit me. But, you know, that all I want is an autograph and to be able to say, you know, a selfie, you know, to be able to say they saw Tom Croydon, wherever they are from, you know.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience.
I think it just seems like a lot of people admired his character. And Ashley, one of our viewers, has said he's one of the most kind, honest, trustworthy and genuine characters that's ever seen on Australian television. But Ashley also wants to know, did you learn anything about yourself while playing the character of Tom?
Yes, that I that I wasn't Tom. You know, there was, you know, it was all pretense from my point of view. It was all a character that, you know, like I helped create, but that I wasn't him. You know, there's no way that I could possibly have been as strong as him. You know, I remember one night here, you know, our next door neighbour called at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'd not long gone to bed, and her sons had brought home a friend who'd gone suddenly berserk, and they rang me. So I put on a tracksuit and went over, and it was freezing cold. It was absolutely the middle of winter. It was wet and freezing, and this kid had dropped a tab of acid. Apparently, you know, they'd all been smoking dope, all the boys, and he dropped a tab of acid and had reacted to it very badly, and he'd put an axe through the television, and he was threatening to put an axe through their mother, and I thought, oh, this is all all I need, and I sort of stumbled over in the dark, and there's this kid totally out of control, wearing only pajama pants in the middle of winter, and bare feet, and walking in and out of this puddle that had ice in it, and I thought, what can I possibly do? And mercifully, the real police turned up and took him into custody. And, you know, and they were tremendous. You know, they were two young guys in their late 20s or early 30s, and they actually talked him down and put him into the car and took him away. And I had no idea how to handle him. You know, like he was just totally off his face. And, you know, I wasn't into drugs at all, apart from alcohol, and I had no idea what to do. You know, I had no idea what to say to talk him down, and these two young guys, without any physical violence or anything like that, just got him into the car and away. And you know, and he was at that stage threatening to put an axe through the mother's head. You know, it's so I was full of admiration for them. You know, they were amazing.
Yeah. What a few questions are coming in. So, what was the most enjoyable thing about being on set at the Blue Healers set?
Oh, it was well, there were lots of things that were really wonderful about being on set with Blue Healers. It was, people used to always say, oh, don't you get bored? And I would say, no, I love going to work. I loved arriving on a Monday, which was when we're shooting in the studio. And I, you know, like I really looked forward to getting back after a weekend and meeting up with my other family. You know, I mean, I had my own family here, of course, but the cast and crew of that show had an amazing relationship, and we were together. We had the same two cameramen the whole 12 years of the show on set with us. So in Tom's office, you know, you'd have a cameraman on that side of the table, a cameraman on my side of the table, and they'd cross shoot. And you had two boom swingers, and sometimes the director in the room, and sometimes the continuity girl in the room, and it was very cramped conditions, and pretty much you were sitting on each other's knee to shoot the show, and I just, our relationships were so close. It was unbelievable, and there were many instances of marriage over those years, and many instances of children being born. William's 2 children were born while we were doing that show, and Lisa got married while we were doing that show, and her first child was very soon after she left the show. And we had, of course, the deaths of many parents and even a couple of crew members back then. And, and we've just recently had the death of our unit manager, who, if you know anything at all about filming on location, the unit manager arrives first thing in the morning with the buses and sets up a tent for the meal tent, and and sets up the caterer's truck and all the wardrobe rooms and the makeup rooms, and places for actors to, green rooms for actors to get away from the set in, and then he, of course, at the end of the shoot is the last to leave. And Colin died last Saturday week, and we've been in email contact with each other, sharing our bereavement, and looking forward to the day when we can all get together and remember him, when, in these, once COVID's over, if it's ever over.
So for those of you listening, John's in Melbourne, or just outside of Melbourne at the moment, so he's in full lockdown.
Yes,
so that's why we're so lucky to have these webinars. There's a couple more questions about Blue Healers. Who was your favourite colleague to work with? And that's a question from Helen.
Well, it's hard to say. They all had specific, as you know, everybody's different, and of course, in the early days, it would be extremely difficult to go past Lisa, who was just such a special talent, and she was exactly the same age as my eldest daughter, so it was like, we had a very familial relationship, and but like, for sheer ability, you couldn't go past William. Like, his ability to just turn things on and off, and as I said earlier, I need a bit of time and space to get myself into the character, but Bill can just, he can be uproariously laughing at a joke and then instantly turn into tears and have everybody else in tears as well. He's just got an amazing facility to turn his emotions on and off like a tap, whereas I have to work my way into them. But for different reasons, all of them. I really admired Damien for his, who came in later, of course, but his absolute commitment to his work was wonderful, and Damien's only quite small, like he's a lovely boy, and William's 6'4", and Grant was over 6 foot, and they used to rib him unmercifully, this pygmy of a man. They used to give him the hardest time, and he used to just soak it up and do his job, and he was sensational, like, he was great. But they're all wonderful. I mean, the head cameraman, the DOP, Steve Scoble, who was known as Sniffer for reasons best known to him, but he was, his ability to get the most out of a scene, and he started at Channel 7 when he was 14. He came out of school and went straight to Channel 7, and he ended up being head cameraman on our show, and the last time I saw him, he was DOP on Neighbours now, and I don't know if he's still there, but you know, like for a guy with absolutely no real training, he was a sensational cameraman. You know, just he could do, and he was prepared to have a go at anything. You know, like and he really changed, in my opinion, changed the way most Australian television was shot. You know, like he always used a handheld camera, a camera sitting on his shoulder, and they weren't light. You know, they were lighter than big film cameras, but they weren't light, and they were hard to carry around. And he would do everything he could to get the shots that he thought would work for the script. And you know, so there were you know, I could go on for hours.
Yeah, it's a little bit like saying which is your favourite child, and you're not allowed to do that, are you?
No, no.
So thank you for that. Elizabeth has asked, do people still tend to think of you and expect you to act as your character of Tom Croydon? But I've read in your memoir that you also get called Sugar and Boss from one of Power Without Glory, one of your earlier gigs. And my favourite, Your Worship.
Oh, yeah. And it's impossible to, I don't know, there's something about me that must be so recognisable that I don't know what it is.
You're just like a mate.
Well, there is that sense, but I remember vividly being in a taxi in Sydney after Rafferty's Rules had finished, and I had my hair dyed white, and it was quite long, and I had a bit of a beard, and I was wearing sunglasses, and I was working with Jim Sharman on David Malouf's only play, and I was playing an ancient Greek Australian, and you know, so I had this white beard and white hair, and I was in a taxi, and this guy pulled up beside me. He said, "How you doing, Your Worship?" And I thought, God, you know, if there's no way that I sort of, you know, wear a mask around, and people say, "How are you, John?" And you know, like they have absolutely no problem in recognising who I am, despite the fact that I'm wearing a mask. So I'd never be able to rob a bank. And I never have wanted to rob a bank. You know, I've felt like blowing them up sometimes, but yeah.
Another good thing about Blue Heelers is that while you were shooting that, you could also live your life on the theatre as well, from time to time. So it feels like that time, although it's such a successful show, you also had, you know, your calling or the lure of the theatre satisfied.
Yes, I was very lucky that the producers, particularly Rick Palaziri, whom I'd known for years because Rick had worked on Rafferty's Rules as well, and he was also the lead director on Sweet and Sour, which was a little ABC show that Archie Michael had been in, and but he particularly knew of how much the theatre meant to me, and he and Gus Howard made a point of allowing me to get away to work in the theatre, and I guess I spent something like 8 years playing jock in the club in various productions. We initially did it in Melbourne with an amazing cast. Bruce Miles directed it for the Melbourne Theatre Company, and there was me as Jock, Max Gillies as Ted, Aaron Pedersen as, I can't remember his name now, the captain of the club, the captain of the footy club. Matt Datinsky played the recruit. Oh God, Jeremy Stanford played the manager, and I've left somebody. Oh, Gary Sweet. Gary Sweet played the coach. You know, and what a dream cast. You know, some of the best known people on Australian TV, and we did this production of The Club, which Bruce directed beautifully. And I mean, I'd never worked with Gary before. Max I'd known pretty much all my life, but I'd never worked with Gary, and he's got a photographic memory. You know, he just looks at the script and then he knows it, and he bang, it just does it. And they were just so fantastic to work with. And Vince Colosimo was in that production as well, you know, so it was, yeah, it was phenomenal, you know. And then we did another production at the Sydney Theatre Company with a cast that included Jeremy Sims and Steve Bisley, and it wasn't as good, but it was, you know, it was all right, it worked. But and then I did 3 different productions playing the same character for Hit Productions, which Bruce directed the first one of, and then Dennis Moore took over as director. And yeah, so I reckon I did about 8 years or more of that, something like 170 productions, performances of that show, even while Blue Heelers was running. And the producers were very happy to let me do it as long as I could get back to town and shoot some scenes for Blue Heelers. And, you know, and in that way, I managed to get into every episode of Blue Heelers, despite the fact that I was working on stage.
That's a fantastic balance between a little bit of what pays the bills and also where you belong. So
yeah, it was.
Was it at that point that Liz asks, do you think at what stage did you think that you'd made it?
I don't think I ever got to that stage.
I thought you were going to say that.
Well, you know, like I don't know. There are times when, you know, I thought when I did the very first production on stage of Death of a Salesman, I thought, oh, I've made it, you know, the best play, probably the best play of the 20th century, and I'm in it, and I'm in it with people as illustrious as Ben Gabriel and Betty Lucas and Ken Shorter, and you think, oh, okay, I've made it. And then you sort of, you know, get to the end of the year, and I'd done Oedipus Rex with Sir Tyrone Guthrie, who asked me to come with him to Melbourne to do All's Well That Ends Well for the Melbourne Theatre Company. I thought, gosh, you know, God, I've really made it now. I've got this big international director that wants to keep working with me. And I said, okay, well, if Robin Lovejoy will let me go. But Lovejoy wouldn't let me go from the old tote. He said, I don't want Sumner to get his claws into you. John Sumner was the artistic director of the Melbourne Theatre Company. He said, no, the bastard will never let you out of his claws once he gets you. And no, he said, I want you to play the hostage. I want you to play the hostage in The Hostage, a Brendan Behan play. And I thought, oh, well, that's nice. I've made it, you know, yet again, I've made it. And then a few weeks later, having told Guthrie that I couldn't go with him, you know, and of course, once you get asked by a guy like Tyrone Guthrie to go with you to another city and you suddenly have images of yourself working in the West End with Sir Tyrone Guthrie, and, you know, like, I've made it. And, you know, like a few weeks after this, Lovejoy recast. He cast Terry Bader in the role of the hostage, and I was given the role of the Russian sailor who didn't say anything but just ran around half naked most of the night chasing the women in the play. It was sort of like a Dostoevsky and Benny Hill, but and it was, you know, I was so cut up by that. You know, it was such a betrayal, you know, and such, you know, being asked to, it's been like being asked to play Hamlet, and then they say, oh, no, look, we don't think you're good enough for that. Would you play Guildenstern, which of course I have played, and I've played Hamlet too, but it's, you know, you often think you've made it, but you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself because, you know, next week you haven't made it. Next week you're back amongst the dross.
So even when you were on stage accepting the gold logie, you still don't think you made it?
Not particularly. I mean, the highlight of that moment was actually meeting Maggie Tabberer, whom I'd sort of known of all my life because my mother was a huge fan of her through Women's Weekly or Women's Day or something like that. But the highlight was actually meeting her for that moment. And
well, your acceptance speech was more about the people who watched the show, not about you.
well, you know, as it should have been, because they were the people who voted for it. It wasn't like a critics award, or, you know, I've won a couple of those, but it's or a peer group award also, which I've won a couple of, and I feel very, you know, like I'm extremely proud of having won the Best Supporting Actor Logie for Power That Glory, which was presented by the TV critics around Australia, and I won Most Outstanding Actor in 1988 and 89 as Rafferty, which was voted for by the people in the room at the Logies, you know, the people who were my peers, and they thought that I'd done the best work. And, you know, like, I'm immensely proud of those. And winning the Gold Logie was, as Steve Vizard said just after I won it, would have been much better if it didn't win. It would have been a much better story.
Is that because Blue Heelers was axed a couple of weeks beforehand, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yep.
And that was a shame. But, you know, like, that's life. You know, TV shows can't go on forever. And, I mean, I was already too old to be a police sergeant. By the time they axed the show, I was past my use-by date as a copper. And, you know, so I had no problem with them finishing the show. It was, I thought it was ended for the wrong reason, but, you know, and the reason it ended was because Channel 7 bought the rights for the AFL for 2 years and paid an enormous amount of money for it. I mean, it looks like peanuts today, but they paid $790 million for the rights to the AFL for 2 years. And, you know, just recently, I mean, the most recent buyers, Foxtel and Seven again, I think, you know, they're over $1 billion. And even back in the day, you know, like, for $790 million, they could have made Blue Heelers for 75 years. And they bought the rights to the footy for $2. And
That's right, and it was, what, $2,000 a kick?
$2,000 a kick, my brother worked out. Yes,
yeah.
He's a chemical engineer and a bit of a brain. And yes, he sort of worked out mathematically it was $2,000 a kick.
I'm really interested to hear about your time doing Crunch Time, which is David Williams' last play. And COVID shut down your performances, sadly. But you did do one performance before you stopped. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, I was really chuffed to be asked to do it, you know, like I had a relationship with David, of course, because of the club. And I'd done another play of his. I'd done the world premiere of a play of his called Let the Sun Shine with Jackie Weaver, just, you know, after she'd done Animal Kingdom, and just before she went to Hollywood and became multi-award-winning, very famous actress. Now, she clawed her way to the top, but Jackie I'd known since 1970, you know, and I'm a big fan. I mean, I love Jackie, and she's a terrific person and a terrific actor, and her work in Animal Kingdom was sensational, I thought. Really, really sensational performance. And you know, at the age of 70, she went to Hollywood and became a big star. And, you know, but, you know, I was the same age and I didn't go to Hollywood. But anyway, I was really chuffed to be asked to do this play, which David claimed at the time was going to be his last play. But David had said that many times before.
Okay.
But I think this really is the last play that he will write. And it was a really interesting piece, and it was set in New South Wales, where there are, you know, the laws for euthanasia, or, you know, voluntary assisted dying. They're still anti-voluntary assisted dying, whereas most of the country now, if you have a relative or a partner who is doomed, then you are perfectly entitled to ask for them to be put down, as it were. And this play, the character that I played was a businessman who has a fractious sort of relationship. He's deeply in love with his wife and with his sons, but is not very good at communicating with them, as many of us aren't, of course. And he discovers that he has a terminal illness, and you know, they're very wealthy people, and he decides that he wants his sons, who are both married, and he wants them to help him to get the drugs and then to help administer them so that he can die with some sort of peace. And it was terrific to do. I mean, the young actors in it were sensational. They were great, you know, and they're going to be very important actors in the next few years, I reckon. I mean, if they're not already. And I was reunited with an old mate from NIDA. I'd been to NIDA with Diane Craig back in 1968 and 69, and she married Gary MacDonald. And I mean, she's a terrific actor, and it was great to be reunited with her. And she played my wife, and it was fantastic to do. Although I have to say that, you know, as I said earlier, you sort of play, as an actor, I try and get deeply into the character and live in the moment. And the first time we did the lethal injection in the rehearsal room was absolutely chilling. You know, I just sort of thought, God, what am I don't think I could actually do this. And I loved doing it, but I have to say that dying on stage once or twice a day, you know, for 8 or 9 performances a week is fairly harrowing. And but, you know, it was a great play to do. And unfortunately, just before Easter, we were supposed to go until after Easter and then go to Noosa for a week of performances, because David and Kristen live in Noosa. And a couple of weeks before Easter, we were told on a Saturday that the ensemble would have to close, that they wouldn't be able to continue. And it's it's the weirdest way I've ever finished a show, and you know, it's sort of unfinished business in a way. You know, we were told on the Saturday that it wouldn't go on, and on Monday we sort of came back into the theatre as a group, and we put on all our clothes and all the characters' clothes, and we walked out onto the stage to no audience but to 5 cameras, and we performed the show as if there was an audience there, which is quite difficult when you're not getting the reaction that you normally get from an audience. And it was recorded and edited and put online for people who had bought tickets for the rest of the season but weren't, because of COVID, weren't able to go into the theatre. And apparently it worked okay. I watched about 5 minutes of it and then gave up on it. I just can't. I'm not good at watching myself at the best of times, but without an audience, I'm absolutely hopeless. I keep thinking, oh God, it's too big. Take it down, tone it down. But as I said, there was a very weird experience, and but I am glad that the people who bought tickets and couldn't come were able to see the production online, and we still have hope that we might remount it next year and do it live again. But as I said, you know, I found it quite a chilling experience to die in that way 9 times a week. You know,
Yeah, and you were talking about earlier about how comparing being on the stage is like taking heroin, and when you don't have the audience there and you're not breathing that same breath that you described, it makes perfect sense. So we do hope, John, that at some point you'll be able to be back on the stage, maybe even doing King Lear. I know you're contemplating that one as your memoir finishes off.
I think the next time I'll get on stage, if we're allowed, will be in January, where we're looking at bringing back a production of Senior Moments.
Oh yeah, that was a very funny play.
Well, we're doing that. You know, it's an updated version that is planning to go all over Australia, but who knows whether it'll all be settled down by January. Let's just fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I can't do it very well anymore. The arthritis is telling me like that. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Well, John, it's been absolutely lovely speaking to you tonight, and public libraries across South Australia are eagerly awaiting their copies to arrive, and our audiences can place holds on them. But we also encourage everyone to support John, as well as our independent bookstores, and purchase a copy of How I Clawed My Way to the Middle. For those of you who prefer to read audiobooks, John has released his audiobook, or his memoir, sorry, as an audiobook, and you can access that on audible.com. John, thank you so much for your time tonight. We wish you every success with your autobiography, and we're hoping that we can get out to the theatres soon to enjoy that craft.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All the best, everybody.
Sorry, what was that?
I just said all the best, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. And yeah, to our listeners tonight, thank you for zooming in with us online, and we hope you've enjoyed our time with Australian acting legend John Wood. Please follow Burnside Library on Facebook and Instagram, and keep checking our website for upcoming webinars. It's been wonderful having you all, and thank you for your time. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.